Good afternoon. The art gallery at Eastern Connecticut State University is back on the air featuring important Connecticut cultural practitioners. Today we have a pleasure of speaking to Donna Dodson, who is a sculptor exhibited around the world. Donna is currently a scholar at the Brandeis University Studies Research Center and a visual art fellow at the St. Botolph Club in Boston. Dodson's recent show, Shadows, at the Boston Sculptors Gallery was met with critical acclaim. Donna was a 2022 Fulbright US Scholar at Q21 Museum's Quarter in Vienna, Austria, working as an artist in residence with her host institution, Tricky Women, Tricky Realities, the world's only animation festival for women. Great to have you with us, Donna.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here.
Can you tell us about your journey into sculpture? How did it all begin?
Sure. I have two aunts that are both very talented with their hands, and I grew up around, people making things, making macrame or sewing, or one of my aunts ran like a wedding cake company. So just very creative, entrepreneurial people. And I got interested, through my mother, we were always making like Christmas ornaments and, just always kind of working with my hands. And that, later on in life when I, had the opportunity to meet mentors in college and whatnot who were professional artists, it really all came together for me.
What drew you to working with wood as your primarily medium?
As a kid, I was really an avid tree climber, and so I would climb to the top of the trees and just kind of sway in the branches, and I felt very free but very connected. And I think that connection with trees and wood came back later in life when I was introduced to wood carving through my mentor, Joseph Wheelwright, who was a Boston stone carver and wood carver. And it the in New England there's so many different varieties of wood. It's kind of a natural resource and a natural material for sculpture.
You often create hybrid female animal forms. What inspired this unique artistic direction?
Again, I think as kids, just always watching cartoons and these sort of talking animals and talking animal-headed, imaginary creatures was something that, again, when I was older, my grandfather took me to the University of Illinois Art Museum one time when they had an exhibition of Egyptian art, and he was particularly interested in like the mummies, but that connection was very meaningful for me since he had taken me. And when I was older and started to go to art museums myself, I saw artworks of like Egyptian art, the Sekhmet, and some of the beautiful animal-headed goddess figures, and in Indian art, Ganesh and different mythological figures that were, for me, again, it just made a connection between art history and and um, something that was felt familiar to me.
Yeah, you mentioned being inspired by ancient iconography and mythology. Are there specific cultures and stories that you have primarily influenced, that have primarily influenced your work?
Yes, I'm very interested in the ancient Amazons and the idea of these warrior women from ancient Greek and Roman art. That's been a big research focus for me for the past, 5 or 10 years. And then there's really in any culture that you look in, there are stories that sometimes are stories, sometimes they're mythology, sometimes they're actual history of different women warriors or goddesses, and that's always been an attraction for me. Um, partly because I had so many strong women in my family, but also in the church that I grew up in, there weren't these goddesses. There weren't this idea of like female divinity or spirituality. So it felt like something that was, missing from my life that I've sought out, through art making and also as part of my research.
Wonderful. Yeah, I know that you collaborated with animators and poets on the project actually called Amazon, Goddesses, and Wonder Women. Tell us more about this collaboration and what it is between your sculpture and animation inspired you for.
It started as a simple idea. Since my sculptures are wood, they're, they're stationary. So the idea was, what if they could move? What if they had, joints in the arms and legs? And so I was collaborating with a friend of mine, Trina Baker, she's at Leicester University and a professional animator, to originally I thought that you could sort of rig the sculptures. You could scan them and rig them, but it's not that simple. It's more like you have to build them up with 3D software in order to have kind of the mechanics built into them. And so working with some of her students at Lesley that were, young animators, and then some of my research assistants at Brandeis, we had a whole team, and then other Melchior Hall, another poet who had written a bunch of poetry about my work. So it's very different from my studio practice, which is very solitary, driven by my own interests and my own research, versus a whole team, and really appreciating how differently everyone thinks when you come together and start to collaborate and share ideas. And one of the most meaningful aspects was having this intergenerational, like a whole nother generation. They all happened to be young women who were working with us. And it was very, interesting to sort of talk through things with them. Once you start thinking about movies or animation, or, you inevitably talk about like Disney movies and sort of these tropes of these, female characters and girls. And so it's something that I feel strongly about challenging in my own work about, women characters and which I think Disney too, like, has moved more in that direction of like the girls having just this self-actualization instead of the idea of like Cinderella, where you're just looking for, Prince Charming, right? Like, and that's your whole narrative, right? So I do think narratives have shifted enormously in the last 50 years, but definitely thinking about animation, history. So it's a whole different genre than my own genre of sculpture, which I'm more well versed in. So it was very meaningful to collaborate with people whose strengths were very different, whose research was very different. And I think it was a tremendous opportunity.
Speaking about animation, you also received a Fulbright to work in Austria with the female only ever animation festival. Tell us about this experience.
So when I was there at Q21, there were um, there were artists from all over the world, primarily Eastern Europe, but also, the States, South America, different places. So um, the Q21 is interdisciplinary, so it's writers, musicians, very interdisciplinary. Then the Tricky Women, other artists in residence, we were all there together because of COVID. There was like a backlog of women who hadn't been able to take advantage of their residency. So I wound up being there. And again, animation is not my primary genre or skill set. So it was very awe-inspiring to be around, professional animators and watch them work through their scripts. We were kind of in similar places. I was I was Zooming with my team every week, so it was sort of rolling along that way, and then writing my script. So it was nice to kind of have everything left behind, and because it was extremely difficult for me. It was just so out of my, which is what Fulbright likes you to do. They like you to do they like to support you to really do something different. So it was fun to dream up the project and have so many strong collaborators. And then I was actually there during the festival. So from all over the world, during the festival, animators come in. And so I was just able to experience so much original animation. And, again, the things that really attract large commercial success are not the full breadth of any field for that matter, but especially in animation, at the festival level, there's some real creativity, there's some real risk taking. Um, there's just some real technical mastery going on. So it was really is, sort of daunting to see like what the quality of mine sort of needed to be, but also a tremendously rich experience. And while I was there, since I am interested in goddesses in Vienna, the Natural History Museum actually houses the Venus of Willendorf, like the famous little tiny carving. So that set me on a whole research kind of along the Danube, into Hungary and the Czech Republic, but also into Germany to go see the Lion Man, and sort of again, my own interest in carving and goddesses obviously overlap with the animation. So it was really interesting to be in Eastern Europe, which I'd really never been in before.
Was your recent exhibition, Shadows, influenced by this experience at any way?
Definitely. I mean, I've always been thinking about, you know, heroes, obviously heroines, who are these women that maybe we've forgotten, in history, or maybe they were overlooked, or maybe they're just a myth. Maybe some of the things that inspire me are really, they're not true at all, but the stories are interesting that get passed down. And so that the animation was pretty specific, in terms of the narrative, but in any research, you're always uncovering all these interesting, paths you want to take. But, so it was fun after the animation experience to come back to my own sculpture and really think about these, from after doing the Amazons and researching the Amazons, to go back and look again for stories that I might have come across, but I didn't have time to really, go into. And then in that show, that was also the premiere of the animation. So we did screen it in my exhibition. And it was nice that it was in Boston, because all the young women who had worked with us, were Boston based. So they were able to kind of get their recognition for all the work that had gone into the animation.
A few years ago, we had an exhibition called Heroinity, and I can see that shadows, right, comes from this idea of shifting the male hero into the realm of female power. It's really beautiful. Yeah, and your goddesses connects your idea of goddesses connects with our exhibition based on Circe. Last year we had, I think a year before, we had an exhibition based on Circe. So we have to collaborate more.
Yes, I would
There are
love
so
it.
many parallel ideas running through our through our studios. So we need to collaborate.
Yeah, I would love that. And I did see your Circe exhibition. That was
Mhm.
really beautiful. And it did coincide because Western Connecticut State University did a Circe exhibition the same year as yours. So there was some creativity flowing back and forth there. And then her exhibition traveled to Trinity Hotchkiss School last year. So it had a second run. With the same artists that were in her group. Yeah. So yeah, Circe is definitely still on my mind.
Yeah, in the air.
Yes.
So tell us about your large scale public art, which probably connects to your smaller or relatively smaller sculptures that are exhibited in a gallery space.
I could say two things. One is my own, which is again, it is sort of another version of my smaller scale. I've done residencies in Switzerland, and the most famous one is the one here locally. It's called Seagull Cinderella, and it was in New Bedford, and it attracted enormous media attention. I think in 2016 and again last year, they asked me to reloan it. So now we're thinking, and memes, and that's a whole podcast in itself. But it was interesting to be the subject of public controversy, which is not uncommon. I mean, public art does beget conversation, and which is sort of the goal. It was oddly difficult and challenging and oddly enormously gratifying to have my work so digested. And public art really, everyone can chime in, especially with social media. There's really no barriers to interacting with public art in all ways. And so it's a whole arena unto itself. And I love it. I embrace it. I think my mother always thought, you know, the highest thing I could achieve as a sculptor would be to have a public commission, like Daniel Chester French and the Abraham Lincoln Memorial, which Chesterwood is, again, it's up here in New England. We're probably very familiar with that. And so, as a contribution, as a legacy. And so that's definitely in my mind. What will my legacy be? What will my contribution be? Will it be public art? And then the other thing I could say is my husband and I collaborate as the Myth Makers, which is a collaborative team. We work with bamboo, which is very temporary. We're part of the bamboo, sort of American Bamboo Society in the United States, and the Bamboo Workshop. There's International Bamboo Congress. It's an international media material and community. And we primarily work in botanic gardens or arboretum. And we also work in municipalities, so cities, communities that want public art. So, again, it's a slightly different audience. I would say there's definitely overlap between the art world and the botanic garden world. But it's a little bit more, I would say, family friendly, a little bit more entertainment driven. So I think with bamboo, it's very large scale. You can build large, you can build quickly. It's very architectural, but there's very little wind resistance. So it's almost a perfectly engineered material for being able to achieve scale, interactivity, kind of what we say like a wow factor. And for us, it's connected to so many different communities, small growers here in the United States, as well as people who are innovating internationally to think about what are really the implications of this material for carbon, capture, for soil erosion, for food, for material housing, right? So so that is like a whole other, things I balance, I would say. Those two I used to have a day job that I balanced with my carving work. When I met my husband, it shifted. Now we do the public art balanced with my studio work. So I do think as an artist, you're often an entrepreneur, you're often juggling, or you often have multiple interests. Maybe you're teaching, maybe you're researching, maybe you're writing, in addition to your own making practice. So I think that's fairly typical for artists.
Yes, it's very true. Your comments about bamboo are fascinating, and I would love to get together again and talk about just that subject because I think for our audience it would be fantastic to learn more about this very elegant plant, and I really enjoy just visually looking at bamboo, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have it in the backyard? And yeah, I never realized that there are so many other aspects of this. Very simple, right?
It's a grass. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
fast growing. Yeah, definitely. Actually, my husband and I would love to come back and just talk about that. It's a whole world. There's a whole world of bamboo out there.
Oh, it would be fantastic. Yes, let's do it.
Okay.
So yes, one of the last questions I have is, and you already partially answered that question is an advice to our graduating students. In fact, today is a graduating ceremony, and the next week they will be in a real open world for their professions, for their ambitions. Tell them something that you learned from your experience that will lead them through this few turbulent years after the school and into the real world.
Right. There are a lot of challenges in real life, in the life of an artist or a sculptor. Um, I would say that it's better to think about how to make great art or how to find your voice or how to find amazing collaborators than it is to think about money right away. I do think that sometimes the money will follow, or maybe it's better to juggle and balance a few things so that you can keep trying to find your voice and trying to make your own work. Um, and I do think it's worth it to have international experiences because I do believe that internationally, I've often found that art is just better understood in other cultures than the United States. And so I think that to go to another culture where you see an artist exalted as a national treasure or to see just traditions of, craft or architecture or fine art that are just intrinsic in everything, I think can be very eye-opening. And I think it can help you just feel great about yourself as an artist for choosing a path and just feeling appreciated by your own culture. And so I do think, not that Americans don't appreciate art, but I do think there is, especially now, it feels like almost an over commercialization of art at the highest levels of galleries and fairs and museums. I think it's getting started. I think community is really important. I think meaning, what does the art mean to you? What does it mean to other people if you're going to make art? I think those things, to me, after practicing art for 30 years, that those are the things that keep you going, that keep you going through the hard times. They keep you answering, like, why am I doing this? And so I think that's when you're starting out, in the middle, when you're old, I think that the reason for making art has to be really, clear, and it's worth it to start there.
As a woman in an artistic world, which is often still dominated by men, was it difficult for you? Did you experience any difficulties, or was it rather smoothly entry way for you in the real world, in the art world?
And that's a great question. I think for me personally, my grandfather bought me my first chainsaw. So I would say from my family perspective, there wasn't enormous over resistant. My father taught me how to use it. So, and I had a male mentor, from college, and even when I was in high school, there was a man in my church who was an abstract painter who wound up being very inspirational for me. Um, so I would say I had mostly male mentors up through, my life, into my 40s, and but I do think the world is different. Like, again, if I started in the 90s, let's say 80s, 90s, and now we're in 2020, so 30, 40 years ago, I had people say to me, well, you have two strikes against you, you're a woman and you're green, and I think that was a very different world than the world we're in now. So I would say, throughout my career, I would say the world has changed, and there's a lot, I think 40 years ago, maybe you could name the female sculptors. There was Barbara Hepworth or, Nikki D. St. Phal. You could name them all in one hand, right? And that's not the case. There's women faculty, there's women now, young artists can have women mentors, and so I think I was more on my own to figure out how to be a woman sculptor I wasn't on my own to figure out how to be a sculptor, but I definitely was on my own for figuring out how to be a woman sculptor. But I do still gravitate towards older women because I think you need mentoring really at any stage of your career. And I take that seriously. I do. And as I get older, I also am conscious about, mentoring and trying to help younger women sculptors too. If there's unique challenges that I faced and I see them facing, I feel like I can be helpful, I can be supportive. Um, so I think that idea that you're in a lineage of sculptors is an important idea that can be very helpful. If you take advantage of it, if you can seek out other people and again, you know, but I mean, as a woman sculptor, I think sometimes you're not taken seriously. Again, like you said, there is still a feeling of like the market being dominated by men or museums or institutions of higher education. The elite institutions, I would say, have a feeling of domination by men. So I do think, again, it's important to, work with other women, find opportunities to really be your best and to support others. And I think that pays off. Again, in terms of longevity, those are the things sometimes that can make the difference between, just like giving up or being discouraged and saying like, I don't see this opportunity out there. I'm going to work with these other people and make this opportunity for myself, and that can really be a game changer and make you feel empowered versus thinking like, I want this opportunity that isn't happening for me. And again, that kind of resilience and can be very important over the long term.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Donna. And if our listeners want to look up your work, you have a website, right? It's Donna Dodson artist.com. Is
Yes.
correct? Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And we'll have you back on the air with the bamboo
Oh, we would love that,
conversation.
Yulia. Thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed our
Thank
time together
you.
today.
Thank you.